Good evening, and welcome everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Asbury United Methodist Church, where we are loving, serving, and transforming lives. We greet you this evening in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and we are delighted that you're with us this evening, but especially delighted to welcome Darlene Taylor, artist, writer, lecturer, and for me, friend, to her exhibit, her first exhibit in Washington, D.C. For those of you who do not know Darlene, she is a lecturer at Howard University in creative writing. She is herself in a creative writing PhD program. And about a year ago, Darlene had an accident, a car accident, and was recuperating from her accident. But more importantly, she had been invited to the Columbus Museum in Ohio on sabbatical, and she was there. And while recuperating from her accident, she conceived of this idea, these pieces that she has done so beautifully. I have never had a concussion, but if I ever have one, I hope that the result of my concussion is as much creativity as we see today. Darlene has worked in government. She's worked on the Hill. She's worked in corporate America. She worked at Pfizer. She was sent from Pfizer to Geneva to work for the World Health Organization. She has a fantastic resume. But what I'm delighted about is that she has decided to allow her creative side, both in her writing and in her renderings, to begin her journey in the art world. And I think she'll tell you all about that tonight for this show, Memories of a Dusty Road. And we welcome this evening Darlene Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. Thank you, Robert, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Asbury United Methodist Church, for welcoming me into your hall today and onto the walls here in this wonderful historic church. What a wonderful place to be, to start to tell my story of creativity in a place that has stood on this corner in this community since 1836. I think I'm in a good place to talk about history and memories. Thank you. So I want to chat with you a bit about the inspirations for these works that sit in the room here with us today. But let me just start a little bit about that journey, kind of tying into what Robert Mallett just shared with you. And yes, I was the Amina Robinson Writer-in-Residence with the Columbus Museum of Art. And in doing so, I lived in the home of Amina Robinson, a textile artist who did wonderful murals of memory and history mapping. And if you are ever in Cincinnati, Ohio, and if you go to the Underground Railroad Freedom Center, on the second floor, you will see just an amazing, really life dedication to African American and American storytelling by Amina Robinson. There are two panels. They're called Journeys 1, Journeys 2, and each one is about 22 feet high and 20 feet wide, and they stand side by side. And the story starts in 980 BC, and it continues through many details that run through Amina's life as well, and run through the life of Black people who lived in communities across Ohio. So I was delighted to work in that studio and have that inspiration around me. The thing that I will say, for those of you all who are in the room with me, you kind of have a sense of my size and scale. And Amina was probably a foot taller than I am. She was 6 feet tall, an amazing statuesque woman. But her table was much bigger than I could work at, so I needed a special table. But I started working in this these heavily textured mulberry papers, and drawing on really memory and history. The works displayed here are inspired by a conversation that I had one day with my mother about baking a blackberry cobbler. I wanted a recipe, but actually I got so much more from her that day. As she spoke about how she bakes with no spoons for measuring, no measuring cups, she was massaging the air with her hands as if she were kneading dough. And she said, "You've got to put your hands in it to make it right." And I felt her telling a bigger story. It wasn't about that blackberry cobbler that I was really wanting to eat, but it was a story about Black life, Black love, Black survival. I saw her in that moment as a porch talk storyteller. Those wise, older women, cousins, women friends talking and mulling over their versions of the way things were. My childhood memories fill with those sounds of porch talkers, their laughter, the cadence of their speech, their and their humming, their witness and head shaking at things that just weren't right, and their hold on, keep going, we'll make it all right. Today, the poetics of that speech and the history that shaped those roads of Virginia, roads here in DC and Maryland, shape my art. The blackberry is a metaphor of Black life as I construct stories in text and textiles, on paper, from memories that come to me in Southern poetics, from the ingredients of a recipe. And mind you, she did not complete the recipe, but you never get the full recipe, right? I guess you have to be there, you have to watch, you have to put your hands in the dough to get it. As my mother moved from how to make the crust to a recollection of her mother making buttermilk, a key ingredient in her baking, I recalled weekends gathering berries in patches along country roads where my family roots began. The labor of children collecting berries and placing them in buckets, the walk along roads fearful of snakes, listening to what might be ahead, hidden in the bushes and bramble, the sweet-tasting, freshly washed berries, and the sweet cobbler. Those memories suggest handwork, craft work, and a living history among fields, forests, and roads. So the narrative in this work is memory passed from one generation to another. It begins with the sound of voices in kitchens, over sinks and at stoves, caring for family and hearth. The story is a recipe of what women craft within domestic spaces, and the narrative progresses with the voice of grandmother's teachings of how to survive struggle and celebrate life. The blackberry is sweat work, life work, love work, and that is Black survival. It is a recipe that unravels the past so that I can know the way Black people feed each other so the community and generations can survive. A rural Southern road is a beginning point that centers the speaker's recall from a hurting past. Cuts from language, fabric, paper scraps reveal deep feelings, even when things can't be completely remembered, because that too is how memory is. One generation shares with the next what they have witnessed and learned. The image here that you see on these monitors of these three women present another entry point in my path to crafting these heirloom narratives. They are ancestor mothers. The baby is my grandmother's sister, and she's held by her mother, and seated there is their mother, their grandmother, excuse me. They are ancestor mothers, and what strikes me is their gaze, the deep look, the suggestion of stillness, questions about them, the women who might sit with them at the end of the day, the women they might sing with, sew with, the secret glances they share. I want to know more about them and the women they would have known, not for what they could have imagined for me or about me, but what desires sat in their hearts, stirred their hearts, what they wanted for themselves, and what they thought of the world around them. What frightened them? How did they talk when they were sitting with friends? What did they confess? How did they talk to strangers? What do they conceal? What made them laugh? How might they have covered their mouths when they cried? What was girlhood like? Womanhood? These questions lead to how I explore a character to make them real. In this image, again, looking at my grandmothers here, dark storyteller eyes meet me. Their gaze is direct, their stance in opposition to the neglect around them. Their heads upright, their backs straight, and their hands resting at their sides, suggesting that they witnessed and they remembered. As I look inside the photograph that was taken more than a century ago, I think of the generations that hold us. Through them, I get something research alone cannot give me. I get memories, memories from the dusty roads they may have walked to get to the homes where they lived, or when they went to visit friends, the places where they loved as a family. So I begin with a question: how did she feel? She is a Black mother's history, a memory I must mine and imagine that tells me how things were. Memory, as Toni Morrison says, the deliberate act of remembering, a form of willed creation to dwell on the way it appeared and why it appeared in a particular way. It is for me to know and imagine what they have to say. A line from Lucille Clifton's generation tells me I'm on the right path in this mining. Clifton writes, "Who remembers the names of slaves? Only the children of slaves." The three generations here, I hear them saying words Clifton wrote in her memoir. I could tell you about things we've been through, some awful ones, some wonderful, but I know that the things that make us are more than that. Our lives are more than the days in them. Our lives are our line, and we go on. I feel part of that line. Their memories are mine. Their memories are like the road, long, present, and when you can't see what's ahead, you listen. So my collages and the materials used to make them are a collection of memories. The sewing, collaging, and silhouette. The assemblage of things echoes those reflections. This work suggests attention to archive and preservation that interests me for how it stands within the context of African American art making and place marking, to talk back to the erasures of public history and documents Black life and culture. Long ago, I wanted to be a historian. Along the way, I found there were incomplete stories and stories I could not know. And that frustrated me because I knew the land was full of histories. I learned that in Virginia, a state and legacy that marks a starting point of slavery in this nation. The past lingers in that landscape and the built structures there. The work on exhibition here comes from longings to find stories to help me better understand myself, my beginnings, and a more truthful history of my people. And imaginings come from along those roads, dust, road, pebbles, quiet nighttime roads on the weary drive back home that made me wonder, who lives there behind the trees? My visual stories answer and call out what might have happened along those paths that express Black women's lives, their end-of-the-week sweat talk, love talk, and their recollections of yesterday. There is everyday life, heart, heartbreak, violence, and opportunity along those paths. And there is a humanity of spirit and love that holds the Black community together. When I find a photograph or image as rich as this, I want to touch those gazes. I don't want them forgotten. History's neglect of their stories extends to the characters in the published books of my childhood. The lack of characters who look like me left me feeling that the experiences of Black women and Black girls did not matter. Their dreams did not matter. But those porch talk storyteller women let me know there are other stories. The stories of their whispers, their witness, their learning. Therefore, these collages allow me to find my way to memories I inherited, stories the land holds, and to mine the silences in archives. I am placing these women at the center of a history that wanted to forget them and ignore them. Marking place matters. The land where my ancestors lived lacked economic investment for generations and is now being bought up. The lands are being eased over and cut up for new roads and gentrification. I feel an even stronger press to have stories of Black life recorded. My history mapping is incomplete. I got work to do. There are many more stories to claim. Remembering using this multidisciplinary approach, I feel I'm doing the work these ancestor mothers call me to do. I'm using language, color, form, texture, everyday things from life, everything I've got to collect, to remember, stories that have been erased and pushed aside. I'm marking that history and placing their stories where they can be read and remembered. Thank you.
Artists will take some questions. Do you have any questions about anything she said, anything you see?
And I'm also welcome to, or happy to walk around and tour the work with you. Yes, a question?
So, I'm sorry, thanks. So, like all artists, you certainly spoke eloquently about your inspiration, and all of us, wherever we came from, whether urban or country, if you will, for lack of a better term, have those histories, especially how we came to this country against our will. How did you decide to choose the materials and the color schemes to make the poem and your story and your search come to life, as opposed to just painting on a canvas or using pencil? You use materials and you sewed them into the paper, the specialized paper, and you chose certain colors to magnify and bring out your expression. Where does that inspiration come? Is it just a natural eye, or does it take training, or is it just an evolving piece in your journey to be a great artist?
Thank you, thank you. Well, first of all, I do use stitch work. I use quilting fabrics. I use vintage fabrics. I use buttons. I use laces. I use found items. And I don't think she'll see this. I've used my mother's old tablecloths. I cut them up and I've made them into, integrated them into my works. So I'm taking the things of life. I've always liked paper, and this particular paper, I'm using a heavily textured mulberry paper. It almost feels like cloth. And so I love the feel of it. I love it in my hands. I love stitching through it. It's heavy. For the most part, I have one piece here that's, I call this one blue lace, one piece that's blue, but the others are basically like a natural or bleached coloring for the paper. And it almost feels like parchment to me, so it feels like it's from the past. And as you see this piece hanging here, if we had a light behind it, it's just really beautiful the way the light kind of shines through and casts a glow on it, so you feel like you're inside the past. The other thing I like about the texture, and you'll see here in this piece here, like this, it almost feels like there's this fracturing, and that's the way I see memory. And so again, this paper and the textures that I found there seem to speak to my ideas of what memory is. It's not complete. I feel like I'm walking a line, but I'm not. I'm stitching along lines. But the memory's fractured, and just like these, just kind of, random lines here in the paper as well. In terms of the colors, I think I began with these more muted colors, and then I've started playing with this bright blue that's over here. And the piece that's in the back, I call it the storyteller, the one that has the sunflowers on it. And I kind of discovered as I was doing the work that I'm the storyteller. So that's kind of where I insert myself into the work. And it reminds me of a little girl dress that I had. My mother used to play softball, and we would go to the games, and my father would I would sit on his shoulders in these, very dolly dresses and watch my mother play. And, so that memory kind of stands with me, and I just found myself attracted to it. And as I started crafting the little girl, I realized who she was and where she stood inside the story. Thank you. Yes.
So the storyteller piece that you just pointed our eye towards, I noticed that the top is different. I figured that is intentional, and it kind of looks like a house roof to me. So what was your idea behind cutting the top of it that way?
Sure. So a couple of things that you'll also see in the work, or maybe it's visible to me and less visible to you all, but there's bits and pieces of the pieces before that follow into the work that comes after it. And working on that piece, I was actually thinking about Stevie Wonder's Ribbon in the Sky. And also kind of thinking about the sky as a house, as a roof, and just what those lines would look like. So sitting her on the porch there, I kind of capped that top, if you will, on that angle to very much feel like the pitch of a roof, which you also see in this, the piece that's just over from it, that same shape of the roof. Yes?
Yeah, I think that we've known you most of your life as either a government affairs or as a lecturer, maybe even as an author also. Have you always known that you had an artist in you?
So, I've always drawn. I've always taken classes in art programs. So I did have a sense of color, design, light, shadow, texture. But I think what really strikes me and kind of draws me inside of this work is growing up, the women in my family, they were all makers. They quilted, knitted, crocheted, they made clothes. My aunts actually worked at a shirt factory. And on the weekends, they would design patterns and make these just beautiful, beautiful attire. So I was always around, I think, artist. My sister-in-law is a doll maker and just an incredible talent who's shaping with color and form. So I think it's always been there. It's always been in me. And I think that was also kind of the beauty of being at Amina Robinson's house and in that studio, is that something that was in me got to come out. I think in that quiet, it was able to come out.
Okay, so you've had a number of different careers. Are you seeing a path where you weave them all together in the future and do something that merges everything together?
You know, I have to say, where I stand now, I love being in the classroom. I love sharing stories and guiding young people into kind of the power of their own stories and to feel empowered to write and speak, and not to be silenced by a world that would like them to be quiet. So in many respects, I feel all these things coming together. I feel that I've always worked in a way that was opening doors of access and opportunity. And that's what I feel the storytelling is too. And I think that with the Columbus Museum of Art, looking at my application and deciding to give me that chance, that they opened a door for me. So I feel that this journey, it's all connected. And it's always been storytelling. It's always been storytelling and connecting with people around stories and things that they're passionate about in their communities. Yes.
I noticed that the women are all, their faces are not visible. They're, from our vantage point, they're looking away from us. And I thought your explanation of why you did that was real interesting.
Okay,
Could you
I'll
repeat
share.
it? Yeah, share it.
Yeah, I definitely will. So one of the things that you'll notice as we look at my ancestor mothers here, I have no idea who took this picture. I know this picture was taken over 100 years ago. And we know that photography was invented around 1834. And around 1850s, there was this practice of photographing, doing his portraits, if you will, but taking people in these moments that, you know, the cameras were really slow. You had to sit really still for them. And I'm sure in this moment, for whatever the purpose was for the photographer, they were probably like, I got something else to do. I got something else to do here. But probably they had no thought to what would happen to this photograph later. And as I see this photograph and other photographs from this era, I think about, again, touching the gaze. And instead of looking at them as objects, I want to stand with them and witness. So as they are witnessing, like this little girl here, she's looking into the space. She's a witness. It seems quiet. It seems like there's not much going on around her, but there is a lot. It's a busy world. And again, she can't see the road ahead. She's listening, but she's the witness for what has happened in the past. So that's what I see with my figures here. They're that witness. They're looking at what's happened. And they're holding those memories, and they're going to tell.
Okay, where are we going? Oh.
The interesting thing was my question was related to her question as well, because I did notice the same thing, how all the characters were standing behind the characters and looking, almost seeing what they're seeing, right?
We're standing with them.
We're standing with them. And my question, well, related to that, what I also appreciate about your work is the fact that even though we're standing with them, we're seeing the back of them and the detail of what they're wearing. Was that something that was intentional in terms of like how you pulled it together in terms of like just the different pieces? And can you talk a little bit about what was it that you were thinking as you were creating each, and look, because I think of each of them as a character, right, who's telling a story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in this one, I was thinking about, I call it blue lace, but I was thinking about shawls. And again, you know, this kind of ties into thinking about quilt making. And, you know, you're using what you got. You know, you're using what's in the house. I was, so, you know, that's a bit of my mom's tablecloth. and some other vintage handkerchiefs and some quilting fabrics, and just kind of cutting them into these triangular shapes that form the shape of the triangle, but also, you know, kind of that shouldering, if you will. And yeah, that's what it's doing there.
I'm drawn to several of these pieces. They just kind of draw me in. I feel like I could be that person looking out, standing there with you. I'm particularly drawn to the pieces that are jagged or burned or something. Could you talk about that technique or?
Yeah, so the burning.
Or unfinished look, kind of?
So again, that speaks to the way memory is, and even the memory in the quilting fabrics, it's, you know, it's what you've got, like, you know, what you've packed away, you know, what you've held in that special box. And so it represents kind of that fracturing, that not having all the details, but kind of piecing it together, doing that piecework to tell that story. So that was a visual way of me sharing that.
What I liked about that one, especially with your book, is that when you first look at those flowers, they look like flowers, but then they look like faces.
Yes, yes.
So you've created this beautiful conversation with the past, and I was wondering in your imagination if your ancestors could come and witness your works, how would you like them to respond? What do you imagine in your daydreams they would say to you?
Well, actually, if I could have a conversation with them, I would say, where are those quilts at? Can I have some handkerchiefs? I need some more fabric. Yeah, I mean, as I said, like when I look at them, I don't think of the woman who's seated. I don't think of having any thoughts of me, but I do think of her as having thoughts for the child who's her granddaughter there, and what her life would be like, and wanting something, wanting the world a better place for her, wanting comforts for that little child that she may not have had, and yeah, that's how I see that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You have a question? Oh, right there.
I guess my question is, what is the extent of this particular exhibit? Do you plan on expanding, like continuing on this story, this journey, or starting a completely different version of it and continuing making your art, to tell different stories or other stories? But this one is amazing and it's beautiful, and I've watched you personally, achieve this. It's so wonderful. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on what you'll do next with this or something new.
So thank you for that. I think I shared Blood on a Blackberry. When I wrote it, I just felt that when I wrote it, it was published in Feminist Studies, and I was really excited to see it there. And as I started reading, I just felt like, what happens the next day? And as Marita Golden, wonderful Washington-based author, has shared many times, it's that, well, what if? What if? Like, keep asking what comes next. So there's definitely a what comes next, and that's where these pieces came from in terms of that poem. And where it goes next, I'm going to continue history mapping. And actually, I've been commissioned, and I'm working on an exhibition now. I'm looking at lost histories of Black women in Maryland. So looking at Maryland's history, that history around the Chesapeake Bay and the Choptank River, and identifying stories that I can tell, and I want to continue doing it through textile. And as you know, the piece that's just over your shoulder there, the woman is draped in a handkerchief. And so one of the things that I've been doing is collecting beloved textiles and kind of memories, if you will, in cloth from friends and family members. And I want a more personal connection to the fabric. So again, if I had the chance to chat with them or to find, where that box is, and I'm sure holds some special treasures, to get more fabric to continue the work, because I feel that there's a presence that's in place, and in this place, I think you feel that as well. I feel there's also a presence that's left in the things that we've held, that we've touched and that have touched us, and I want to employ that in my work going forward. So thank you.
We want to give all of you, there's another question. We want to give all of you time. Darlene may want to walk you around and talk about some of the pieces. I'll just stand here.
Oh, okay.
But Darlene mentioned about memory and stories. At Asbury, we started this church. Our ancestors started this church in 1836. It was built by slaves and Freemasons, a group of them, came together and bought the land on which the church stands for $300. Needed to get a white man to go downtown and buy it. This area was a large farm, and we were able to acquire this land before slavery had ended. We broke off from Foundry United Methodist Church, which is now on 16th Street. That's not where it was when we broke off, because of segregated worshiping, and we just decided that was, our ancestors decided that was enough. We have a history of Asbury where we sort of learned all of these things, but just a little bit about Asbury and why storytelling is so important. We have an oral history project here at Asbury. The person who leads that effort is Carol Travis in the back, where we record memories and stories of our older members, of our younger members, but we've been doing this oral history, Adele Banks, we've been doing this for a while now. 4 times, I think, we've done it. And we think it's important to preserve our stories. The church that was built in 1836 was torn down, and a new church was built in 1864 during the middle of the Civil War, that the members of this church collected enough money to build a brick church in 1864 on the same property. Asbury was also the site where the first meeting for the first colored regiment in Washington, D.C. to participate in the Civil War. They met in the basement of Asbury Church. So we've been telling this story and trying to preserve this story and tell our stories for a very long time. So Black History Month, to have Darlene come here with memories of a dusty road is very meaningful to us. Pastor Dr. Ianther Mills made history by being the first female pastor of Asbury. She's been here almost 10 years now. We want to keep making stories and telling stories. But of course, every day is Black History Month at Asbury. But we always do something a little special during Black History Month, and we could not be more delighted to have you here tonight and for Darlene to be here to tell us all about this wonderful art. She didn't tell you this, but there are about 40 more pieces of this art. I have told her that she needs to start parting with it and selling it. She's an artist now, and she says, I just can't let go of them. I said, well, there's no point of this but to spread this word. So I hope that you will nag her tonight as I've been nagging her to let some of this art go and make new art so that we can share it in our homes. When she brought several of the pieces over here to decide what she wanted to show, there are several of them that I really love that are not in this exhibit. But there are many more. And
They're a different story.
Different story.
They're another
Well,
story.
we want to thank her for being with us tonight. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Reverend Mills, and thank you to the production team here at Asbury, and thank you, Carol Travis, for helping me bring this all together. That's to you all. Thank you.